Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. Let's get into it. Today, I want to talk about a rule of thumb, a principle known as Hanlon's razor. Hanlon's razor, Hanlon''S. What is this? What is this all about? Well, first, let's start by saying Hanlon's razor, it's named after a guy named Robert J. Hanlon, who is not actually the originator of the concept, but he somehow became associated with it over time. The exact origin of the idea was well before Robert Hanlon and can be found in a lot of earlier works, but it started showing up a lot more through Robert Hanlon's work, and as a result, the principle has been associated with him. Now, interesting fact, if you're curious why it's called a razor, there are other principles that have the term razor associated with them. To me, it's kind of interesting to find out. The term razor is obviously not a razor like one you would use to cut, but like not a cutting tool, but it's a mental shortcut or a guideline for making decisions. So when you call a principle a razor, it has to do with the fact that it's a shorter process or a mental shortcut or a guideline, a principle of some sort. It's used to describe like a rule of thumb that helps to simplify and clarify. So Hanlon's razor, what is it? Hanlon's razor suggests that a person should not attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence or ignorance. Maybe more simply put, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Now, the term stupidity may sound harsh, but it's used in this context to refer to mistakes or ignorance or a lack of understanding rather than to necessarily demean individuals. Hanlon's razor really encourages people to assume that the mistakes that other people make or the problematic actions that others, kind of put out there are more likely the result of just a lack of knowledge or a lack of skill rather than some sort of intentional harm. Now, a good example of this. Let's imagine a scenario where we have a coworker who is consistently failing to respond to emails or is always missing important deadlines. Now, it's really easy to think that they're not responding to your emails or they're not, they're missing deadlines because maybe there's some malicious intent. Maybe they don't like you. Maybe they don't want to, work with you, whatever it may be. Hanlon's razor would instead tell you that rather than immediately assuming that the coworker is deliberately being uncooperative or deliberately being disrespectful, if you apply Hanlon's razor, it might be explained, I should say, or it might involve considering other explanations. So like in this case, one might consider that the coworker could be overwhelmed with a number of tasks, or maybe facing some personal challenges, or maybe is just struggling with time management skills. Hanlon's razor would suggest that rather than attributing the behavior to malice, it's more reasonable to assume that your coworker's actions are just a result of lack of awareness or incompetence or just external factors. So by adopting this mindset, you might approach the coworker in this situation with more understanding. Maybe you offer assistance, or maybe you seek clarification rather than jumping to conclusions and assuming negative intentions. This obviously leads to a much more constructive communication. It leads to problem solving. It leads to fostering a more positive work environment. This came about for me because just a few weeks ago, I had a couple coworkers who were texting. And they were texting around a sensitive topic. And frankly, I'm not a big fan of texting around sensitive topics because so many things can be lost in translation. And that's exactly what happened here. These two were texting about something sensitive because neither could really convey the proper emotion. Clearly, there's no tonality, there's no body language, there's no personal connection in the sense that they would have had on a face-to-face meeting or a Zoom or even a phone call. They chose the text, and as a result, each interpreted the text from the other as malicious, with bad intent, and just were angry about it. Each party was angry. However, if they had thought through this scenario using Hanlon's razor, maybe, just maybe, they could have considered that there wasn't a malicious intent by either party here. Instead, there was just misunderstanding. There was, a message that was being conveyed, but through a filter that is text, that maybe that text was just being misinterpreted. So again, both jumped to conclusion, and it led to kind of chaos. But if they had applied Hanlon's razor here and did not assume negative intentions, it could have been so much more constructive, and the problem could have been solved immediately. It also would have maintained a more positive, relationship between the two, which is now having to be rebuilt. So I talk about this today because I think that all of us have so many interactions each and every day, and we jump to conclusions. And I'm certainly guilty of this. And I think that when you apply this principle, when you apply this rule of thumb, you take a step back and you ask yourself, hey, maybe this really isn't malintent. Maybe I'm just jumping to conclusions. And if you do accept that and you kind of, back off a bit, your approach is likely going to be different. So the focusing question for everybody today, where does this apply in your world? Where do you need to give a little bit of grace? Where is it possible that you were in fact cooking up a story in your head that's not really accurate? And if you apply this principle, if you apply Hanlon's razor, the outcome is likely to be significantly better or significantly greater. That's all I have for you today. The No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.